Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
This is your time. This is your call to arms. For the Cryptid Connection is your voice. I'm your host, Jennifer.
And I'm your host, Stephen. Welcome to Cryptid Connection.
The Cryptid Connection podcast is brought to you by CryptidConnection.com, a website dedicated to you, one who has interest in all things cryptid and paranormal. CC is a place where you can enjoy a hassle-free lifestyle and community of Bigfoot pursuit. All our podcast guests are members of the website. Stop by via the internet and visit. Guarantee you will start to feel at home. CryptidConnection.com.
This episode, we have Rich Daniels. He's been a researcher for about 14 years, and he is, by profession, a behavioral specialist. Let's find out from Rich how his specialty and his training has affected him over the years in dealing with cryptids and cryptid reports. Rich, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, we really appreciate you coming on. A lot of people may not necessarily know you who are listening to our show, so I'd like you to go ahead and introduce yourself, give a little bit of your background, how, what things you think are relevant, if you don't mind.
No, not at all. As you said, I've been a cryptid researcher for a while now, 14 years. I started in 2005, excuse me, and concurrent to that, I have been working in the mental behavioral health field since 2009. And using that both nonprofit area and now I've worked in a school system, and all working with kids with behavior challenges, at-risk youth, as they're called. The one thing that I started to notice is that there was actually a connection between the two, and that was that a lot of the people that I worked with in my professional field would report different effects that they had, different things that they were suffering from as a result of their reaction to severe trauma in their lives, and things like severe car accidents or being some part of severe act of violence, near-death experiences, those type of things. They were reporting the same things that I heard from cryptid witnesses, mostly Bigfoot witnesses. And I started to notice a correlation there between the two. And that led me to really get into something beyond just your typical Bigfoot research, which became focusing on the actual effects that people felt from their encounters. And that's really what I've been working on for the last 3 years.
Okay. To back up a little bit, can we go in and find out what got you interested in cryptids to begin with? How did you end up in this lifestyle?
To be honest with you, I had something show up in front of me that nobody could explain. And to be honest with you, I didn't even understand what I was seeing when I first saw it. This was in January of the year 2000. And not to give a long, drawn-out explanation, but in the evening, I walked outside a house trying to put the hatchback down on a car. And as we had told him that previously we had heard something in the woods, something big moving around, which of course, this being in Western Maryland, we assume it's a bear. And that's all there was to it. So when I went out there, I expected that if I was going to see anything, it was going to be a bear. Did see something in the tree line. There was a gap in the bushes and the briars that lined the tree line there. And I looked at it, and it was huge. I mean, I could see the shape of it. I mean, it was pretty plain to see. And I really didn't wrap my head around it. There's a thing in mental behavioral health called cognitive dissonance. It's where you're experiencing something, you're looking at something, but you're not wrapping your mind around it. You're not truly understanding what it is you're seeing. And that's where I was, because at that point in my life, I was pretty much what you'd call a Bigfoot agnostic. I did not think too much about it. You know, I had heard the stories like everyone else, and to me, they were just stories. So going into that situation, that was not on my mind at all. I made no connection to anything like that at all. To me, it was a bear, and it was a very weird-looking bear. Number one, it looked like it was sitting down, and its head was 5 feet off the ground. It had very wide shoulders, and when I looked at it a little more closely, I could see knees sticking up, kind of like it was squatting the way a baseball catcher would. And the state of mind I was in, I looked at it and I kept saying, that is the weirdest looking bear I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And it was 40 feet from me, and I stood there staring at it for about a minute before the young lady I was dating at the time kind of hollered to me out the door to get out of there again. I was trying to get myself torn up by a bear, and kind of snapped back to reality and ran back in the house and didn't think too much of it. 5 years later, I was living in Orlando, Florida, and had insomnia, and went to watch TV at 3 o'clock in the morning. Flipping through the channels, I see a show on Bigfoot, and I remember distinctly saying to myself, "This will put me to sleep." And 15 minutes into the show, a gentleman from Washington State gave a statement on what he had seen, and it was about a 95% match to what I had seen in Maryland 5 years before. And that kind of snapped me into a kind of a different state of awareness on things. Even at that point in time, 5 years later and 1,000 miles away, I broke out into a cold sweat, and my hands began to shake, and the color drained from my face, and it really impacted me. And it was from that point on that I became very, very fascinated with the whole thing. And like a lot of people, I just want to find out what's going on. I just want to know some truth about it. And I've been looking ever since.
So do you go on outings yourself, or do you just like to gather the research of others? Do you do personal vindication?
It has been both. The last 3 years I've been working on the study that I've been trying to put together. And that kept me out of doing a lot of things for a long while. In fact, this past June, when I was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I was presenting this study for the first time at the Marionette Menominee Bigfoot Convention that goes on up there every June. And so I presented it there, and I got to get out in the woods while I was up there, and that was the first time in over 3 years that I've actually been able to get out and do some of these things. And it's just been, 3 years of work putting this thing together that has kept me, very busy and kept me out of there. But, I'd much rather be in the woods. I'd much rather be doing things like that. And so, I guess the answer is I've done both. I've been out in the field, and I've been an armchair researcher, so to speak.
Richard, I've got a question. You mentioned when you were telling about once you realized what you had experienced, it was over 5 years later, and yet you still got the chills and the sensations. Mm-hmm. Was it purely because you realized you had come that close to something unknown? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is you had a delayed effect, and it still affected you after those 5 years. What do you think the reasoning was that?
I think understanding what just what was there. A creature that was more than likely close to 9 feet tall when it stood up. A creature that was probably somewhere in the area 700 pounds or more. And in, understanding something that massive was staring at me 40 feet away. The thought of what it would be capable of doing if it really wanted to. I think that's what really impacted me more than anything else. It's just, and the more I got into the research and the more I understood about these creatures, the more chilling the thought of it really was.
The more you realized that was no bear.
No. It definitely was not.
Yeah. I can understand the implications can be staggering.
Well, just to give you some perspective, the research that I did, the last time that a bear of that size, that could have been sitting down and have its head 5 feet off the ground and be wide enough to match the description of the shoulders that I can give you, was the short-nosed bear during the Ice Age 10,000 years ago. There is not a bear even close to that size recorded anywhere in that region.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. So you had your encounter, and then you came to terms with it eventually, which led to your fascination and everything, and then you started doing research. How did you break into the community? What was your experience reaching out to people? Was it an easy thing to do? Was it kind of a hard thing at first? Did you notice let's be honest, we're talking cryptid here. Did you notice a lot of nutcases, or something like that? We've all been there, and I'm very curious. How was your experience? How did you reach out and find anybody and get involved?
Well, initially, with the spread of social media, the way it has been, it's made it a lot easier. But initially, in 2005, social media wasn't yet a huge factor. So a lot of it was online research that I got into, and finding individual websites that were dedicated to it. And thank goodness, for Google and Foxfire and all those search engines that were out there at that point,
right,
made it a lot easier. But initially, it was information finding, and I kind of styled myself as a Bigfoot profiler at that point. I wanted to find out all the common factors that I could about these creatures, and to be able to see what a median description of it would be. And really, it came down to just reading every piece of information that I could find on it, and that was from anywhere in the world that I could find anything. I read about the Stone Apes of Vietnam. I read about the Yowie in Australia. I read about the Almasti in Russia. I read about South American creatures. I read about it's funny, these creatures are reported everywhere but Africa. It's stunning, but you name it, and I pretty much read reports and legends and myths about it. And there's probably somewhere in the area of 13 to 15,000 different reports that I've read, and in that way, I became very familiar with it. And as the advent of social media grew, I was able to start contacting people, and literally finding people on these pages, on Facebook is the primary means. And the one thing that I think people will tell you that have known me for a while doing this is that I do not shy away from asking questions. And that's really that was my way of doing it. I didn't go in there and want to tell everybody what was what. I wanted to go in there and find out what was what, because to that point I hadn't been in the field. I hadn't done any of that. And so when you get into this field, the one thing that you're going to find is that almost everybody does not mind answering questions. And thank goodness for that, because I had literally hundreds of questions to ask. And if you can think of something, if you're interested in the subject, you think of something to ask about, I probably asked a question related to that. It's not exactly what you're asking for, and the curiosity really took over, and it really was fueled by my desire to know what was going on. And you combine those two factors, and that's really what fueled me and, got me a foothold, I think, in the community. First off as a witness, and secondly as a budding researcher. And from that point on, I did sort of the typical, what you would call typical research. Go out in the woods, look for things, see what you can find. And had, some varying levels of success. Most of the time early on in my field research, I was relying on other people. I was going with people that had done the footwork and being able to find these places and get out and have the experiences. And it was only through that experience, going through that stage, that I was able to start to develop my own identity as a researcher and find my own places to go and start doing research in that way. And that was about the time that I had a third encounter at that point. That was when I was by myself out in the woods, and it was just not a good idea because I got myself into a situation that very easily could have turned out badly for me. And I had an angry creature stomping around my position that was ready, that was ready to just have walked through this area without being accosted, and then all of a sudden I was there, and it was not happy with me. And that's when I learned about the thing that everybody should have on their minds when they go out into these woods, and that is to respect the space that these creatures are in. There are certain areas where they don't want you to be, and they'll let you know. And I found out the hard way in that this thing spent 45 minutes trying to chase me out of the woods, and I didn't have much of a choice because it was pitch dark and I didn't have anywhere to go. So eventually it walked away and got out of there. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't see anything, a lot of researchers that are as gung-ho as I've been. I didn't think about everything that I needed to know. Number one was night vision gear, to get any kind of night vision capability. And number two, I walked out there thoroughly unprepared for anything negative to happen. And you can't do that. You have to go out there with the expectation that things will go bad, that things are going to go wrong, that you have to have contingencies for everything. And I was very lucky in that nothing bad happened at that point. I just had the daylight scared out of me and learned my lesson and learned not to try to want to be that guy, because that's what I was determined to do. When I say that guy is the one who gets credited with documenting these creatures for the first time. And everybody, I think, out there is really on a quest to do that. When you get into this type of research, you have no other choice but to think about being the first one to be able to prove the existence of these things. And that, along with, in and of itself, it brings so much with it. But what that encounter taught me was it's not worth it to go out there and put yourself in a situation where you could get hurt, to where you could possibly lose your life. And not necessarily these creatures, but if that had been a bear that I encountered, it would have been very tough for me to deal with that bear. And, that really made me think long and hard about what I was doing. And it is the absolute last time that I have been out on any trip into the woods by myself. And it's just a smarter thing to do. It's not that I don't think I can handle it. It's just smart to do, to have somebody else around, at least one person. And that has led me into this phase of my research, to where I have really found my own place in my own niche. I kind of did it. It kind of happened by accident. But in, the recognition that Bigfoot witnesses were in their own ways traumatized by their experiences in many instances, I realized I had a skill set that could address that. And what I've become is kind of more of a specialist in the field rather than just doing the general research. And, there's the traditional way is to find a research area and pound that research area, go out there and look and find the signs and find everything you need to do. Whereas mine has become talking to more and more people, being around and listening to their stories and keying in on what they have, how their lives have changed after the experiences they had. And in such a way, I think I've stumbled on something that's a form of evidence that has been sitting in front of us all this time and that we never really recognized. And hopefully the study that I've been working on these last 3 years illuminates that for a lot of people.
Speaking of all of that, but before we get into your study, I want to know something. You mentioned that if that had been a bear, that would have been an extremely difficult situation to have handled.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, well, I guess first off, I'm going to have to ask you, what do you think these things are? Whether they're a hominid or if they're a hominid and closer to human or something like that. And I guess the reason why is, with your behavioral specialist training and background, what is it you thought about that Sasquatch and the fact that it did essentially terrorize you for that length of time, but then walked off? It did not finally get ultimately violent. It just grossly showed its displeasure, for lack of a better term. It was, because I'm sitting here thinking that you probably were getting some sort of an intimidation display, or you were there, I wasn't. I want to know, I guess, what's the profile of that Sasquatch? Have you been able to theorize, and I know it's going out on a limb, but I'm just curious what your thought is.
Well, the thought that I can have is that what I had stumbled on is a small little canyon that led out of a forested area, and I really thought that they were using this as a transit in and out of that area. Excuse me, because what led me to that area in the first place is that I had found a news article here locally in New Mexico that a small town right outside this forested area had a sudden spike in missing dogs and cats. Ooh. And I put two and two together because this area has been long connected with sightings and activity. And so I went and checked out the distance between this town and this wooded area, and really got a good look at it, and found enough signs to lead me into that particular area to research. And I zeroed in on this canyon, small canyon, not tremendously deep, but small enough to provide cover if you're going to be walking in and out of the area. And I really think that I have placed myself in a spot where these creatures felt comfortable. Mm-hmm. They felt comfortable that they weren't going to be seen, they weren't going to be accosted in any way, and they didn't have to worry about it. And I became an obstacle to that, especially for this creature, because I believe it didn't see me until it was uncomfortably close for its liking. The best I can say is, if it had been a mature individual, it probably would have seen me long before, because it would have been looking and either gone around or turned around and left. A mature individual would have avoided contact. I think I was dealing with a young male, possibly not too far off from separating from his family group to go out on his own. Mm-hmm. And it just really wasn't paying attention, and walked up on me, on the position that I had. I had built a small blind out of deadfall that was around. And it just got within about 20 to 25 yards of me. And that's when it noticed me, and it made it angry. I was in its safe space. I was interfering with what it intended to go to. And it got angry, and it proceeded to stomp and bark and scream and growl and you name it. and it moved around in my position doing that in about a 270-degree arc, trying to spook me out of there. It's the only way I can describe it. And it was, the severity of it I understood because I could feel the sound waves of the barks and the screams and everything hit me in the face and the chest. I could feel the ground vibrate when it stomped. And, we're talking from something, 60 or 70 feet away that was doing that. And that, the only thing that could come over in my mind at that point was, wow, did I really get into this? I was in over my head and I knew it. Because when I go out into the woods, I don't carry a gun with me. And it's not because I don't support guns. I'm not an anti-gun guy. I just don't trust myself with one in a pressure situation. I really don't want to rely on myself to operate a firearm in a pressure situation. I'm not trained for it. I don't have the confidence for it. So it's just better off that I don't have it. I do carry an air horn. I do carry bear spray. And it was at that point when I realized how horribly under-equipped I was for that situation. Because if this was exactly what I think it was, that creature could have taken me at any time it wanted to. And the only thing that I think kept it from doing that was the fact that as it stomped around in that 270-degree arc, I kept turning to face it. I made sure I was facing the creature at all times. Because the only thing that clicked in my mind was that animals try to get in behind you to be able to exploit your position and attack you from behind. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't letting him get behind me anyway. So that's what I really think that I encountered. A young male that wasn't paying attention, got surprised, and got angry as a result of it. And I have no shame in telling people that after it left, it was about 3:30 in the morning or so, I didn't want to lose. I mean, I had a big flashlight with me, a nice flashlight. But if you use that, you're going to lose your night vision. You become dependent on that light. And I was really thinking of the fact that I needed that 20 or 25 feet or so that I could see in the dark to be able to operate effectively. I'd use the flashlight if I'd have felt the thing was coming closer, but it never had. So I basically just sat there and waited for first light. I didn't want to appear to be retreating too soon because that would invite pursuit. I just wanted to be able to see. And I waited until first light and gathered up my stuff. And I turned a 45-minute hike into a 20-minute jog back to my vehicle and got in the vehicle, got everything packed up and, shut the door, put the key in the ignition. And at that point, I broke down. I literally started crying and everything just came out of me, all the emotions. When I truly felt it was over, when I got that feeling, everything just came out of me. And that's what had been pent up inside of me for hours, and waiting for that to end. That's when I realized that I needed to operate in a different way. I needed to be smarter about what I was doing.
It was an emotional release, huh?
Oh, big time, yeah. And the thing is, I'm not a small guy. I'm a former power lifter. I'm 6'2" and about 285 pounds. And to be in that situation and to realize that I didn't have any choice in the matter of what happened. Everything that happened was up to this creature because that was the alpha in the situation at that point. And I'm not even sure if I had a gun to hide behind it, if it would have made a tremendous amount of difference. I think if that thing wanted to take me, it could have. And if nothing else out of that whole scenario, that whole situation, I came out of there with a much healthier degree of respect for these creatures and the signs that they'll give you. The signs that they provide aren't printed up, but they are out there, and you just have to be able to recognize them. And, I could have very easily been, hitting the side of the head with a rock. I could have been overwhelmed when a thing just ran at me and started to pound on me, whatever it wanted to do. And, I'm very fortunate that nothing like that happened. and I'm able to come out here and still do the work that I do. And, I think the work that I'm doing now, with that experience really makes me appreciate what some other witnesses have gone through as well. It helps me to understand what they're feeling and to validate what they're feeling.
In respect of that, your 3 experiences, the last one seems to be the most traumatic. Did you go home and share that with anybody? Any of your anybody in your life? And did they react the same way that you are learning that your research subjects have family that react?
My family is pretty much neutral on this subject. They don't get into it at all. It's my wife and my daughter. They pretty much understand that it's very important to me, and they allow me to do what I do. And in the same respect, I don't draw them in. Mm-hmm. If they want to be involved, they'll be involved. I do mention it a few things to my wife from time to time, as couples will do. But after that experience, I kind of kept it under my hat for a few months, and then talked to a few of my research buddies that I had about it. And they all were in agreement that A, yes, it was really stupid. B, you're really lucky. And C, boy, do you have something to offer other people. And it's kind of hard to argue with that logic from people that have been doing this a long time, whose trust has really been built in you. So yeah, it's when you have an encounter, and one of the things that I'll talk about later is that part of the process is you really find out who your friends are and who you can count on in your life. And sometimes it's not the people that you think it would be.
All right, Richard, I think that gives us into a natural break-in to your current research. Now, you just released your research paper. I was wondering if you could go through and at least summarize it for us.
Give us the highlights.
Yeah, or break it down. It's as detailed as you want to go. You have the floor, sir. For any of our listeners, we do have this paper posted on our fan page, as well as it's posted as a blog entry on our website. You can find it on either ones. Also, there is a link Richard has that he has posted it to on the National Cryptid Society. You can look that up also on Google, and you'll be able to find it there.
Fascinating read.
Richard, could you go ahead and go into your research?
I can. Basically, this is what I've done for the last 3 years. And getting into it, I didn't realize it was going to be as enormous a project as it was. But I was really hoping to have it over with in a few months. And as it turned out, it became a real passionate effort that turned out to be. Basically, what I did was search and monitor Facebook groups for people that reported encounters in which they were really disturbed or really shook up or reported some effects to. And I would contact them via the comment section and let them know what I'm doing. And I gain their permission for further contact and and be able to talk about it. And most people were very gracious about it. They were very relieved to have somebody that was interested, that really wanted to hear what they had to say. And it wasn't just to take their story and put it on a website and make money off of it. It was interest in them and what was going on with them as part of their experience. Right. And so I ended up talking to 408 people in 3 years. And most of them I talked to at least a couple of times. Through that process, I selected 148 of those 408 that I decided to include in the study. And, the process of even getting ready to do this was really something. I worked in the radio business for 10 years prior to my being, doing what I'm doing now. And interviewing people was no big deal. Interviewing skills I had known for a long time. But at some point, you have to be able to determine truth in what people are saying. And so what I ended up doing is researching interrogation techniques, and in talking to people and being able to get their stories, and using those techniques and different things really helped me determine who the solid stories were, who were the stories that were airtight, that nobody could question, and be able to put that data in there. And so part of what I did was use those interrogation abilities, things like making people retell the story, having them start from a different point in the story and go from there. Because I talked to a bunch of people in these stories that they couldn't do that. They could only tell me their story from start to finish, which raises a red flag. Mm-hmm. If you try, if the story goes A, B, C, D, E, and you say, okay, let's start at C and go and finish, and they can't do it, it makes you wonder. There were other people that were inconsistent in their relation of facts. There were other people where when they retold it, everything got bigger and better. Things got more flashy, or they remembered more things, and it was that kind of stuff that enabled me to say, okay, there's a reason somebody can bring up to doubt their story. So I'm not going to include that. I took the people that had the most consistent relating of their experiences, and were able to determine there, because it wasn't just by text interview. I Skyped with a lot of people. I interviewed some people face to face. So there were a lot of things that went into it. I tried whenever I could to be able to make visual contact with the person rather than just interview them on a text message or via email or something like that. But it broke down to 148 people. And, I forgot to say, the major filter that I used right away is, and again, deciding of the 408 cases which ones to use, you had to take the ones that you could remove the most doubt from. And probably the most repulsive part of this for me was that I had to ask people and then eliminate the people that answered affirmatively about personal and family histories of mental and behavioral health diagnosis. Working in that field myself, that information is valuable to work with people and be able to understand what they're going through and how to approach them and everything like that. But from anyone from the outside, that becomes a reason to doubt those people. And, I had to eliminate the folks that reported that because of that factor. It would shed, an ability for people to doubt onto the data that I was going to provide. And it's not to say that I don't believe those people. It's not to say that they weren't believable, that they weren't genuine in what they were reporting. It was merely to remove the ability of people to doubt the overall data that was provided. And that was the hard part for me, because I have a real passion to work with and help folks like that. And not to put their data into the report was very tough on me. But it came down to the final 148. There were 112 men and 36 women involved in it. And 141 of those people reported seeing Bigfoot. 5 reported seeing Dogman. If folks know what Dogman is, that's basically a canine version of Bigfoot. And there were 2 people that I included into the study that reported seeing alien life forms. And the reason I did the last 2, the Dogman and the aliens, was that I started to notice that across a lot of paranormal divides, people were still reporting these features, these aspects that were changing their lives after they had these encounters. And what I had done, I originally called the condition that these people are suffering from cryptid encounter syndrome, but I changed it to paranormal encounter syndrome, because their reactions, the affect that they feel afterwards, is crossing the lines of all the paranormal realms.
Similar
with
across
cryptids,
the board.
with aliens, with ghosts. I'm finding more and more, the more people I talk to, the more I find it's the same type of reactions that they're having. So I really coined this label for the condition that these people are under because of that, and it's become a real fascinating thing that we have going on now. Now, as I got into it, one of the things I asked people were if they ever sought mental or behavioral health support, and 22 people out of the 148 reported that they did. Unfortunately, that didn't work out well for most of them. 7 of those 22 people kept in a treatment program for 6 months or more. And the unfortunate part were that 6 of those 22 people were diagnosed with mental health disorders, which really alarmed me, being somebody that's involved and has worked a long time in the field. 4 people out of those 6 were diagnosed with schizophrenia by mental health providers. And these are people with no history of themselves, of any mental health diagnosis, nobody in their family, and all of a sudden they were told they had schizophrenia. One was told that he had bipolar disorder, and then there was one young lady who was 38 years old was told she had early onset dementia. What this leads me to believe is that the mental behavioral health field is thoroughly either unprepared or unwilling to handle trauma that's reported from undocumented sources.
Ooh.
They'll handle the trauma that comes from a severe car accident or a severe act of violence or chronic abuse or anything else. So from known traumas, they'll be fine. It's hard for them to accept the report that an encounter with an undocumented animal has provided the trauma for their for the reports around that. And unfortunately, 5 of those people were either referred to other providers or not offered services at all, told to just go.
I'm wondering if some of these health professionals have a mindset of the fact that there could never be such a thing, so we have to ascribe a known symptom or a known disease to this so we can treat it.
Yeah,
is that what you're trying to say?
Without being able to actually talk to the people that determine those diagnoses, I couldn't tell you. But what I can definitely tell you is they didn't pay attention once they heard the source of the trauma for some of these individuals. They didn't hear anything after that. They immediately went to some condition that generates hallucination, that is, people being out of control of their minds or things like that. And, unfortunately, I'd like to tell everybody that the mental and behavioral health field is 1,000% airtight and everything like that, but people make mistakes. There are problems that arise in the mental and behavioral health field. And, this is part of it. And thank goodness there were only 6 people that had to go through this when they, because misdiagnosis is one of the worst things that can ever happen in the mental and behavioral health field. And I could tell you some horror stories about it that I've seen, but this, it's something that, we have to accept. We have to accept a certain percentage of cases are going to be botched. They're not going to be handled well. And unfortunately, these 6 people had to go through that. Getting back to the study and vocationally, the witnesses, they came from pretty much every vocational level you could think of, except executive level. We had people that were doctors, and we had some lawyers and some police officers that were part of this, and pretty much every bit of blue collar, white collar, white collar vocations, everything you can get in there. And that's what I was really happy with, is that it was all kinds of regular people, and they were willing to come forward and willing to tell me what their professions were. Number one, because that's not something that they want known. Witnesses want known a lot of the time. And the reason being is that the ridicule that witnesses face, ridicule, it's harassment, it's targeting in some cases, is very, very real. And all it takes is one story like that to get out there, and people are not really going to want to share their story. And that is part of the trap that people who have these experiences fall into. And they don't do it because they made a bad decision. They do it just because it's part of operating. In that, when you deal with somebody that's gone through severe trauma from known sources, even people, let's just take, for example, people with PTSD, they don't want to talk about their experiences because retelling is reliving, and they don't want to go back through what they did, what they went through. Mm-hmm. Somebody with what I've dubbed paranormal encounter syndrome, they want to tell somebody about it. What they've experienced is something so fantastic, so amazing. They want to share it with somebody. The problem is they don't feel they can. They don't feel they can approach people and be received in a respectful way. There's going to be some sort of judgment on them because they say, "Hey, I saw Bigfoot," or whatever, and that's unfortunate. That leads people into an area that was easily the most pervasive thing that I found in this study, and that's the length of time that it took for people to come out and actually share their stories. 36 people of that 148 said they shared their story with somebody within a month of it happening. 112 waited longer periods of time than that. 21 waited a year, 26 waited 2 years or more. 42 people waited at least 5 years. 42 is a very heavy percentage out of the 148. And these are people that waited 5 years or more to be able to find somebody they can talk to about. And then there were 23 people that waited 6 or more years. Now you got to think about that. The longest period of time that I had somebody tell me to report that they waited, was one gentleman told me that I was the first person he talked to about his encounter that was 35 years before. Now, if you can imagine having something that shakes you up tremendously to the point where your life changes, but you have to hold it inside for 35 years. Now I think you're understanding why I do this kind of work, why I have chosen this type of research, because that's an unbelievable agony to go through for that amount of time. That's a tortured soul for half a lifetime that has to go through that. And I don't really enjoy the thought of somebody having to go through that. And that's unfortunately where our society is on its acceptance of just the existence of these creatures. Not the impact that encountering these creatures have, but just the mere existence of them. And it's an unfortunate thing, very unfortunate thing, terrible thing for the witnesses to go through.
Well, it sounds like your research is going to be a great benefit to the community.
I'm hoping so. I had a lot of objectives going into this, but validation for witnesses was one of them, and also the ability to have this out there for researchers to let them know. It's like, look, here's what these people are going through, and don't do what I call rushing the creature. And because we as researchers, we want as much contact and as much information about these creatures as we can get. So what we end up doing is you meet somebody that's a witness and you say, okay, how big was it? What color was it? Did you smell anything? What was it doing? Did it get aggressive with you? I mean, we start to go through all that. And here's this witness standing there like a cow being milked, and nobody's even asking them if they're okay. And a lot of these witnesses, it's a hugely impactful experience that they go through. And instead of addressing that, a researcher who is powerfully excited about getting more information about what they're studying is just asking them about something from the outside. And what I want researchers to understand is that people need that support from us. Oftentimes, we're the only ones they feel they can trust to tell. And if you're not the only one, you're one of the few that they will tell. And so what I want researchers to be able to do is learn just some simple initial techniques in talking witnesses. Let that witness feel a lot at ease, to feel that they don't have to be guarded, they're not being milked, their information. And what happens actually in that process is I get far more information from witnesses when I can make them feel supported and they relax than you can in any other way. The example I'll give you is one lady I merely started off the interview by saying, how are you? Are you feeling okay in dealing with this? Where are you with that? And she didn't talk about the creature at all. She talked about herself for about 10 minutes, relating how she was dealing with things and things like that. And then she naturally just led right into telling me about her experience. And when I asked her to write it all down for me, start to finish, which I usually, when I want to do a little more in-depth analysis of somebody's report, I have them, I tell them, so just sit down and write it from start to finish, include every detail that you can, even if you don't think it's relevant to what we're doing, include it. If you were hungry, tell me you were hungry. You were tired, tell me you were tired. Include all those details. Well, I had this lady go through that process, and I didn't hear from her for a few days. And she sent me an email, and I opened up this 13,000-word document.
Wow.
That was amazing. It's the longest report I've ever seen. And but that was far more information than I would have gotten if I'd have just asked her about the creature.
Absolutely.
And so those two factors, the validation for the witness, to let them know, number one, you're supported. Number two, there are people out there for you. And number three, you're not alone. You have other people have gone through this. And then the educational part for researchers, which is not only going to help them in their research more, but it's also going to create a more welcoming atmosphere for witnesses to come forward, because witnesses will talk to each other and they'll say, hey, you need to talk to this guy because, man, he really made me feel good. He's really got my back. I know he does. And that's how I got so many people in the study, is I got referrals.
Yeah, it sounds like your technique of research has provided many emotional outlets in a positive way for many people.
And that's what they really do need. They really need to be able to unburden themselves of this information, but they need to do it in a safe environment. They really need to feel secure and supported in what they're doing. And otherwise, we're just there milking the cow.
Exactly.
And we don't want to do that to these people.
No, we don't want to do it.
And that's not to down other researchers. That's not what I'm doing here. They don't have the training that I do. They don't have the background that I do. I don't expect them to. I mean, everybody comes into this field for their own reasons. But what I want to do is off of some of these skills and some of this ability to support the witnesses more, not only to enhance the experience for the witness, but also to enhance the research that they're doing.
And we're going to stop right here. because where Rich goes in the next hour is a surprise that we didn't expect. In the continuing next episode, Rich reveals that his cryptid life and research has not only involved Sasquatch, but it's also involved a skinwalker. Join us in the next episode to hear the conclusion of Rich Daniels, all of his research efforts to this point, and his skinwalker encounter.
Guests of Cryptid Connection are all members of the Cryptid Connection website. Join the community, a safe, secure, and private place for all your paranormal and cryptid pursuits.
Every cowboy, he always misses when he's aiming at the target in his head. And every broken man finds his idle hands grasping at tomorrow's promised land. And I've been thinking about running, and I'll get out on the town just for myself. And that's when I saw her, and she looked right through me. And when I said I do that day, I really do. 'Cause every cowboy, he always misses his shot when he's aiming at the target in his head. And every broken man finds his idle hands grasping at tomorrow's promised land. And I've been thinking about riding, and when I get the first draft back with no red ink, but I've been thinking to do my best work. Yeah, I've gotta leave this town to find my way. And when that plane touched down on that island town, I knew that my life's work was in their hands. So I started digging for wells of water, and I'm a hero in their eyes. It's clear to see. 'Cause every cowboy, he always misses his shot when he's aiming at the target in his head. And every broken man finds his idle hands grasping at tomorrow's promised land. And I've been thinking about the time that I have wasted sitting here. 'Cause I've been thinking that all this thinking is the thing that keeps me further from myself.
The music and soundtrack for the opening is from Epic Film Score by Alex Kaskin. The closing credits are Every Cowboy by Cellophane Sam.